Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. I hope you had a good break. I know it was short. Maybe you didn't get a break from work, but you got a break from Penn State for a week. So I've missed you all. I'm glad you're joining us. I know it's earlier than usual, but I think it will be a great session tonight. Um, are there any questions in general before we get started with class? Where we are? We have this is the beginning of week 14 of a 15-week semester. We have Scott Bittler with us tonight from Gartner, and we will also have a presentation by the big data team tonight. And next Tuesday night, we will have the final two group presentations. And then I will make the midterm or the second test available by next Tuesday, so we can look at the questions in class, during class together, and then you will have until that Sunday to complete it. It'll be in a similar format as last time and maybe a little bit shorter. I think that might be good. So looks like we have 20 people here, though you're going to see my name multiple times because I'm logged in at multiple places, and Scott was gracious enough to log in as me tonight because we couldn't get another login to work. So here we go. Scott, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Oh, loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Excellent.
So why don't you, I have your short bio here that I grabbed from Gartner, but why don't you, in your deep voice, introduce yourself to the class? We have some great students in here with some great experience, as I've told you before. So take it away.
Well then. I think the what you see on the screen largely says most of it. You may find it curious. Some of you that are reading it closely may look at that and say, "Well, gosh, there toward the end it talks about serving clients on all 7 continents." And if you know your continents, you're thinking, "What? Antarctica? What's with that?" And so a little trivia. I actually have worked with clients on all 7 continents, including Antarctica. A lot of people don't realize that there are 3, I'll call them cities, they call them stations, that are inhabited year-round in Antarctica. And they're managed by the National Science Foundation, and I worked with a contractor that was responsible for all the infrastructure support of those facilities in Antarctica. So I haven't been to Antarctica and don't plan to go, but yeah, interesting. We've covered the globe, and I've been to 5.
I learn something new all the time. Yeah.
It's interesting what's going on. Fascinating challenges they have down there. Let me tell you, as you might imagine. Yeah, in terms of my background, I was an analyst, a vice president in research at Gartner for over 15 years, focused on enterprise architecture and highly related sister disciplines, business and IT strategy, innovation management, portfolio management, and that sort of thing. And of course, for the past couple of years, I've been a leadership partner working more closely with our premium level service subscribers to our Enterprise IT Leaders program, and working with them as a kind of a trusted advisor, coach, mentor, et cetera. And I've had the privilege of a great relationship with Penn State for over a decade now in a number of different dimensions. sometimes teaching there and some executive management programs, and working with people like Rosalie on programs, and once in a while touching the IT side of the house as well. So love working with the folks in Happy Valley. And thank you for the opportunity, Professor Ocker, to speak to the class tonight. And
well, we're very happy to have you. Very happy. Thank you, Scott.
Super. So you want me to take it away at this point, or
Sure.
You want to tee
Sure.
this up? Okay. So she gave me pretty much the privilege of an open landscape in terms of topics to get into tonight, and I selected a couple that I want to dive into. No slideware tonight, although I've got plenty of slideware, trust me. But I thought I would tee up a couple of topics with you verbally, and then really get into some discussion. And so for those of you that have a microphone, be prepared to use it and engage when we get to that portion. Or alternatively, you can use the chat window, and Professor Ocker will help me moderate that, and we'll do some questions that way. But the topics that I wanted to focus on tonight, and after we address these topics, we may have some time for some miscellaneous Q&A on other EA-related topics as well. Happy to do that. I think we had about 45 minutes for this portion before you move on to your other agenda items tonight. So I wanted to focus initially on, and I'm going to deal with two topics, but first I wanted to deal with the topic of enterprise architecture as a discipline and how it relates to, dovetails with, interacts with, synergizes with a sister discipline of innovation management. Enterprise architecture and innovation are two topics that many people don't believe go together, or at least don't go together very well. And in fact, some people believe they're conflicting, seriously conflicting in many areas. And when they're done wrong, that's true. But when they're done right, when they're done properly, they are actually quite compatible and synergistic and mutually reinforcing. And I want to talk through that a little bit and even share some of my own personal example story on that. And so that's topic one, and then we'll do some discussion. And then I thought I'd also touch on something that's written about quite a bit in the last couple of years in Gartner research, some of you whom you probably have access to, and many of you probably not. And that's, well, my term for it is bimodal for EA. Many of you have heard of the term bimodal IT, and then something about that, and I want to talk about a variation of that in the EA space and the importance of it. So let's talk about EA and innovation management first. First of all, what are we talking about with innovation management? That's not the focus of this course, but it's, again, a sister discipline that architects and those studying architecture should be concerned with. You should be concerned with a number of sister disciplines that EA as a discipline should be synergizing with and dovetailing with in organizations as it's conducted, so that it's not some island function. So innovation management is really about the coordination of the innovation activities in an organization, inspiring more innovation, encouraging, incentivizing innovation, managing it so that it's directed into the most high-value areas, funding it, even creating a little internal competition where it's appropriate and healthy. Often there's an innovation lab, either a business broad enterprise innovation lab, or sometimes it's more narrowly focused IT innovation lab that's involved in the management thereof, but there doesn't have to be. And so that's innovation. When I say innovation management, that's generally what we're talking about. Now, most often, innovation, the leadership and management of the innovation function, has a leader that is separate and apart from the chief architect or lead architect and its leader. And very often, I would say, the vast majority of cases I've seen, those leaders are typically not working closely together, and that's a problem. That's a big missed opportunity. Enterprise architecture, with or without a sister innovation discipline, needs to be done in an agile way, a highly agile way, especially in today's world. And that enables, when it's done right, that enables directed innovation into the highest value areas. So most of you have probably seen in your careers, people get, and hopefully this is not you, although I suspect some of you have had this happen to yourselves, where people have been accused of technology for technology's sake. And too often, such accusations are true. Those individuals are guilty as charged because they have not necessarily linked their work to some business strategic endeavor that the organization is trying to go after. That link may or may not be there, but if you haven't made the link clear in your communication, then it would be easy to see how folks might be guilty of technology for technology's sake. Now, when you link it up with EA and the innovation that's going on with, whatever, maybe it's the application of some emerging technology to some problem. When you link it up with EA properly, it solves that problem. So let me tell you a little story from my own experience. I led an organization one time called, before becoming an analyst, before becoming part of this Gartner, and before that Metagroup. Before that, I worked in a high-tech manufacturing organization, and I led an organization called Computer Technology Engineering. Well, this was the IT innovation lab, essentially. We didn't call it that, but that's what it was. It was the kind of applied R&D, IT R&D kind of lab environment. In fact, we had a physical lab as well. In that case, and this group is, essentially it was the technology sandbox group. It was the group that would pilot, in the application of emerging technologies that we thought were appropriate, and would do pilot projects, proof of concept projects, first small scale deployments, if you will, preparing the organization for broader deployments. And this is the group that you might expect would be most likely at risk of being accused of technology for technology's sake. And indeed, people tried to make that accusation from time to time. And I kind of loved it when people came with that chip on their shoulder to make that accusation, because I was ready for them. And what I was able to do is, when people said, well, why do you have, Joe over there working on that? And they would say it with that attitude, right? And I would, calmly respond and say, well, because it satisfies this particular, it addresses this particular architecture requirement, which indeed traces back to a certain transformational business outcome that we're going after, which indeed traces back to a business strategy that we're trying to pursue as a business. So I could show explicit traceable line of sight between what that innovation activity was and a business strategy. And we did that using the artifacts of enterprise architecture. And inevitably what I'd like to do sometimes when I did that is I'd play a little mental judo with the person that was making the accusation, and I'd push back and say, now tell me, how is it that, Sam over in your group is, show me how his work is lined up to, some appropriate business strategy. And inevitably they couldn't answer the question, and they shut up and they never bothered me again. So, I think these, I know these disciplines are very synergistically aligned very nicely. One of the challenges with innovation management is, you can innovate on all kinds of different things. And how do you know where the highest value areas to direct innovation efforts would be? How would you know? What analysis do you go through to find out? Because what you don't want to do is necessarily, actually with a very small chunk of your innovation budget, you may want to have it totally free form and just let people play with, whatever, their choice. But you don't want to do that with all your innovation bucket of money and funding and time allocation. For the major chunk, you want it to be somewhat directed into problem areas that align with particular major initiatives that you're trying to go after as a company. And that's where you can really get the power of the synergy with EA, because EA done right has done the analysis that leads you to those targeted high opportunity areas where innovation focus has the greatest potential payoff. So let me pause with that, and before we get into another topic, let's see if we might have a little discussion and interaction on that thought. And here's a good time to open your mics and chime in, or use the chat window.
Hi, Scott. This is this is Steve Grunch. So I had a couple quick questions for you. The first one is, what are you finding within organizations of how they go about setting up these innovation management groups? I know in my organization, we actually do have an innovation group that, kind of spearheads some of the, latest and greatest technologies that we want to incorporate into our architecture. Is that a finding, or is that something that you are looking at as well?
Well, I would say a couple things, and thank you for the question. And Susan, I see your note in the chat window. We'll take a look at that in a moment. Was it Steve? I think it was Steve. The couple things on this. One is that the function of an innovation management group is not, this is really important, it's not to with whatever staff that group has, not to do all the innovation work themselves personally. That's one of the mistakes I see some organizations making. But rather, it's their job to be the coordinator, the motivator, the encourager, the facilitator, the enabler, and all of those kinds of things. Innovation, and ideas for innovation can come from anywhere. People can have great ideas from literally anywhere in their roles, and it's their job to, really kind of foster that and bring the necessary resources to bear on seeing to it that great ideas get the light of day and get pursued, not necessarily by even the person that created the idea. Sometimes the person that had the idea isn't the best one to pursue it. And so I think that's the key. And when I had this group that I mentioned earlier, we did have some really awesome people in the group that did some of this work themselves personally, but they didn't do it all. They often worked with other subject matter experts in the organization, and sometimes other subject matter experts in the organization did it on their own, and it was our job to kind of manage the portfolio. So, for example, we didn't want 10, I'm making up a number here, we didn't want 10 different groups innovating on the same thing unbeknownst to each other. That could be wasteful efforts and needlessly redundant efforts, right? Now, you may want to have more than one group innovating on a particular area because you want to deliberately set up some internal healthy competition and the best one win kind of thing. But you want to know you're doing it. You want to consciously decide, do we want 2 groups? Do we want 3? Probably not more than 2 or 3 is what I've observed in most cases where you choose to have more than one. So you're kind of, again, that coordination function. Now, very often what organizations will do to create a greater, a greater ability to innovate is they will create a separate workspace apart. It may or may not be with a lab, but a separate workspace apart from the normal work environment. This is particularly healthy to do in a big organization. And people will spend a chunk of time, a few weeks, a few months in this different space, focused more full time, if not full time, on the innovation activities that they're zooming in on. That encourages out of the box thinking quite a bit more than just, hey, it's an extracurricular activity on top of my regular day job, right? There's some great books on this topic and so forth as well that we could mention. So those are some ideas on that. Go ahead, please jump in.
What do you think about? This is Rosalie. Why don't you go to Susan's comment in the chat
Let me have a look here.
So I was going to say,
there's Susan now. Hi, Susan.
hi. I was just going to say, because we are really, a couple of years ago, the word would have been agile at Ford. Now it's innovation. And they're really trying to move the needle on being more of an innovative company, because a lot of the things we're doing. And they're moving the mark from being a big thing is from a 50-50 split on 50% run the business and 50% new, to a much higher percentage on innovation. But what you need is stability in running the business. So you need to have that EA, stability that keeps everything stable, but you need to have the innovators going out there and looking for new ways of doing things. And one of the things that I came up, well, there's two things. I just recently took a half-day class on innovation, and they brought up this video of a company called IDEO. And it's all a YouTube video on a shopping cart that they developed. And what they do is they're a company that really does just little innovative things. They get orders to do something innovative in a space. They bring together a bunch of people, a think tank type of thing, and they come up with ideas and show how they actually work through a process to do innovation. And it brought to mind when I was taking this class, I also took a tour of the Model T, the old Model T building where we first built our Model T. And they mentioned that Henry Ford, on one of the upper floors of this building, he would bring in all kinds of inventors to work their magic on vehicles that Ford had. So the Model T, they'd get to use it and try out their different parts and their different innovations that they had developed. And that's how the whole thing started, where they had new and improved of doing things, because inventors were allowed to practice and try out and fail and get things going. And it all lines to where we're headed in our direction again, taking on that same sort of idea. So I do think that EA helps to stabilize things, but they also allow innovation to actually happen.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And IDEO is actually very good at some of this stuff, so thanks for sharing that. They practice the concept of design thinking as part of their solutioning, their approach to problem solving, which is, it's got design thinking has a lot of merits worthy of discussion beyond probably what we have time to get into here. Yeah, I certainly commend some of their good work and examples to the group. But let's speak to this issue that Susan raised of agility and innovation versus standards, and this tension that is inherently present between the two. And this actually kind of also leads me into this second topic I wanted to get into. A good straight person there, Susan. This bimodal for EA thing actually addresses this. So on one hand, you're right. EA is about, out of the EA process comes things like standards. And so one of the tricks or keys, not trick, one of the keys is to make sure that we don't get too black and white and too, I'll say, purist as architects with trying to standardize bloody everything, right? We want just enough standards just in time, right? Just enough architecture just in time in the areas that matter most. So we need to consciously decide what areas do we need the benefits that come from standardization and limited diversity in the environment in order to drive down total cost of ownership and those kinds of things. What areas will that provide the greatest value to us versus what areas do we need? How do I want to say it? If you model, let me kind of paint a visual model for you. If you take, and this, I know you talked about business architecture earlier in the class. If you were to take the models of business architecture and analyze the business and say, okay, let's take each business area, each business function, and label it one of two things. It's either largely stable, that is to say not changing very much or very fast, or the other label would be volatile, meaning it's likely, as we move forward into the future, it's likely to change at a more rapid rate. or we might need it to change at a more rapid rate. So we're going to take every business function, we're going to label it one or the other. Okay. So in the stable areas, those are the areas where standards are pretty important, right? And the other area where standards help a lot is the standards that define the interfaces between things, so that we can have standardized ways of accomplishing integration and interoperability. But you may want those volatile areas. Those are the areas that you need agility, right? And so you may want to deliberately have fewer standards in your architecture that address those parts of the business, either functional areas or technology areas or both, so that you have greater degrees of freedom allowed and enabled and even encouraged by the fact that there's not, a clamped down set of content there, to foster and enable the agility in those areas where you need it most for the business, while at the same time having stability via standards in the other areas, and also in the interconnects, the lines that connect the dots between these spaces. Does that help? Does that make sense? Questions, comments, thoughts on that? Forget to unmute yourself. Can you still hear me?
This is Sue again. So one of the things that we did a long time ago is through a lot of trial error, and errors, find out that we really don't need to develop in-house applications that we don't need to have a competitive advantage on. So things that are stable, HR, finance, those kind of things, tax software, are some things that we don't develop in-house for the company because we figure they're off the shelf and they should be stable in the external world. So those are the areas, like you say, that we've labeled as stable, not going to change much, and we shouldn't bother doing too much innovation in. And I think that kind of rings true to why we pick things off the shelf in certain cases and develop others in-house in other cases.
Yeah, it's good, and that's the application of an architectural principle that I often see, and I often see it stated poorly. So that's worthy of mention here. I often see a principle that says buy instead of build, and that's poorly stated, because the better version of that principle is buy for competitive parity, build for competitive advantage, which is what you described. Because there is a time and place where you could and should build, even though you could buy. And that would be, of course, to get a competitive advantage or sustain one. I'll give you an example. At Corning, I was in the optical fiber business, very high-tech manufacturing. And you can buy, and even back then, this is a number of years ago, you could buy optical fiber manufacturing equipment on the open market. But if you were to do that, lease or buy a warehouse and buy a bunch of this equipment, go in there and start making fiber, you're not going to be able to compete with Corning very effectively. Why? Because Corning doesn't take that approach, and didn't then. Corning designed and built most of its own manufacturing equipment for making optical fiber, either under patents where the machinery itself was patented, or it was held as a trade secret, one or the other. And they made very conscious decisions about which way to go in those cases. Now, they spent a ton of capital to do that, as you might imagine. And why would you do that if you can buy it off of the open market, this manufacturing equipment? Well, because their goal was to create and sustain competitive advantage by doing superior manufacturing. They had manufacturing capabilities that far exceeded what could be accomplished with manufacturing equipment that was bought on the open market. And it allowed them to produce a much higher quality product at a much faster rate that they could charge more for, and had capabilities that other competitors couldn't produce. So there is a time to build even when you could buy, but it needs to be, if you're doing it right, it's because you've made a conscious choice that you're going to compete in that area and create an advantage. Make sense?
does to me. L'Oreal has a question. He has his hand raised. L'Oreal,
Scott,
you want to?
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Scott, thank you for speaking with us today. I want to talk about governance when you're standing up these innovation management teams. How do you advise your customers on the issue of internal governance when talking about the innovation and also enterprise architecture? Because these areas certainly dip into the realm that the other chief officers and directors may be accountable for. They may already have a research and development arm. You have acquisition, you have IT with the IT architecture, strategic planning, so on and so forth. So how do you advise them when they're interested in starting an innovation lab or innovation management group in terms of working that governance piece?
Gosh, that one, I'm not sure if we have enough time to address it sufficiently, but let's try to take a whack at it. Much of this depends on the culture of the organization. Some organizations have decision-making styles that are much more, I'll say, command and control oriented, kind of top-down command and control. Much others have decision styles that are much more collaborative and more socializing of ideas and that sort of thing. So you have to take into account the culture of the organization very much. Some organizations have a strong, I'll say, teamwork culture of working together across organizational lines and so forth. And some organizations don't, quite frankly. The teamwork quotient, if you will, is not so strong. And so there's no one right answer here, but I'll give you some ideas. I think one of the first things is that there needs to be a pretty strong executive level commitment to the innovation that we're talking about here. It can't be just some buried group in the organization that's trying to do this as a skunkworks thing. That doesn't generally get as far as a more conscious, deliberate investment. And the organization, the staff of the organization, needs to hear from the executive leaders, not just from the innovation office people, that this is important. That we're going to invest in innovation, and here are some of the ground rules for how we're going to operate, and how you can and set the behavioral expectations really around their individual work, and also in their collaboration with the innovation office in doing some of this work. I've seen organizations, what works often to kind of get things rolling is to set up some kind of internal incentives that the innovation office will set up, with some rewards for idea submissions, and it's more than just an idea box. It's for example, you can use kind of an internal social media style approach to have the people in the organization actually rate the ideas, and the top two or three ideas or whatever will get funded. And so it's not just management that's deciding which ones have the greatest merit, but actually the employee base through this kind of internal voting mechanism. Now you set up the criteria for that, right? So that folks aren't just deciding what they think is cool based on no company relevance. So you set up the ground rules for how they're to be rated. And then people might get anything from simple things like movie tickets, or it might be a bonus, or any number of different things that would be motivations and funding, and maybe the opportunity to break away from their day job and work on the idea. So I've seen some pretty cool things that way. But I think one of the things in terms of governance is really setting up the funding mechanisms. What bucket of money are we going to allocate into this area of activity? Another big thing to talk about up front, and this has to do a lot with communication and education, is changing changing the way people think about success and failure, and what those words mean, right? So what we want to do is we want to communicate to the organization that failure isn't always a bad thing. And in fact, when it's done properly, it's not even really failure. It's learning, right? So in other words, what we want to communicate is that, especially with some of these, innovative sandbox kinds of projects, is that failure isn't bad. What's bad is taking a long time and spending a lot of money doing it, right? In other words, we want to fail fast, and we want to fail for the right reasons. If we fail because we did not anticipate and plan for and manage something that was able to be anticipated, then that's not good. But if we fail because we ran into a stopper, a roadblock that was not able to be anticipated, and it's just not solvable right now, maybe with available technology today or whatever, then that's not bad. We just want to learn from that and move on quickly, right? So I think it's changing the organization. People need to understand that we don't want to fear failure. We don't want to be so conservative that we're so nervous about failing. We need to change that culture, and learn by failing fast and moving on. That helps foster innovation programs a lot. And again, if you kind of use the EA program to direct it into the high impact areas, then you've really got something going on there. Now, in order to do that, by the way, that requires the EA program to really have its act together in the front end of the EA journey. When I say the front end, I mean, driving from business strategy into transformational business outcomes into architecture requirements, and that stuff that guides and directs the architecture work, not the details of the standards and the stuff on the bottom end. And too often, architecture programs are missing important work on the front end that would be essential for guiding innovation work as well. Now, I think we've got only about, time is flying here, about 5 more minutes, actually, if we stick to the 45-minute window. So other questions?
Let me just jump in here a second, Scott. Team Big Data, are you there? Someone there from Big Data, I hope. Do you think 45 minutes is enough time? If we went to you at 8:25 or 8:30?
We just did a quick practice run. This is Mason here.
Hi, Mason.
And I think we can do it in 45 minutes. 30, we might have to go a little faster, speed some things up, maybe cut a little
45 minutes. If we go, I meant to say if you start at 8:20 or 8:25 or 8:30 at the latest and go to 9:15, you think that'll do it?
Yep, that should be fine.
All right. So Scott, that gives us a little more time.
Okay, we'll take a few here. I don't want to get in trouble with those big data people, though.
No, I don't either. Really, they're big.
Big data is a big deal.
That's right. You see some comments over there. Students are appreciating you and have done some of the things that you've mentioned in their own companies. And someone, Jeff Gleason, says that his sister was a VP of marketing in Corning's fiber optics unit. So
how about that? Small world, right?
Yeah. Do you want to move on to bimodal?
Let me speak quickly to this bimodal for EA thing, because I kind of touched on it, but I didn't really explain it. So what our analysts are really promoting, I'll say, in some of their more recent research in the last year or two, and some of the talks they've done at conferences and so forth, is this idea of imagining two distinctly different but complementary and synergistic, I'll say, flavors or emphasis in your EA program. One side of it's called traditional EA, and the other side they're calling Vanguard EA. And so the question is, what's the difference between the two? And it's those two together that I'm kind of, this is the Scott label on it. I'm calling it kind of bimodal for EA, looking at these two different modes or dimensions of EA. So traditional EA is what most of you would think of about EA, where they're looking at an emphasis on standards and identifying the standards that are needed to drive rationalized simplicity of the environment, improving cost of ownership, and reducing needless complexity and those kinds of things. Typically addressing the existing landscape of the environment and rationalizing that, not just the technology infrastructure, but across the business, information technology and solutions dimensions of EA. So that's traditional EA. Vanguard EA is that dimension of EA that's looking at the agility side of the question, looking at the issue of digital business and what does that mean, and how do we think about transformational business models that will take us into the future to get where we're trying to go, and imagining what that looks like and modeling that, and fitting with agile development, even from a software development perspective. And this is the side that would very much more synergize with the innovation sister discipline that we've talked about earlier. And the important part of this is that we're not trying to say that traditional EA goes away and is replaced by Vanguard EA as we move into the future, but rather to say both are needed. One's not more important than the other. Both are important. And we don't want to set the expectation that you traditional EA people are passé and history and the action's all really in the Vanguard space. No, not at all. They're both important and both needed. Just as when you look at bimodal IT and mode 1 and mode 2, and I won't take the time to get into those things. Same thing there. We're not trying to say mode 2 is the hot and sexy cool one and mode 2 goes away or mode 1 goes away. No, you need both. Leading edge organizations need both, and the same is true in EA. And so this, again, it dovetails nicely with our innovation discussion earlier and how that synergizes with EA in a positive way, and not this, it allows us to resolve this, I'll say, creative tension that can exist sometimes between the two. So let me pause there again and see if we can have some discussion on this. Is anybody practicing that in their organization now? And what are you finding? Somebody's asking here, Michael's asking, how is risk encouraged in the new bimodal EA? Well, risk is encouraged primarily in the Vanguard side. The traditional side is more for operational stability. And so it's more risk averse, largely in the traditional side. But it's very much encouraged in it, and indeed that's one of the reasons you have the Vanguard approach. Is we're addressing new models for the future that haven't been done before. So there's inherently risk associated with that because it's new and emerging and transforming. And so anytime you do that sort of thing, there's risk associated with it. But the way we want to, like any well-run project or program, risk needs to be managed, right? And so a big part of risk management is understanding what the risks are. People often ask about, well, how do we manage this risk? Well, the biggest part of managing risk is identifying the risks in the first place. What to do about them becomes much clearer once you know what they are. And there's all kinds of risks. There's technology risk, there's vendor risk, there's timing risk, there's organizational adoption risk. And so you need to look at all those things as you take this into account. And then, of course, organizations have different tolerance levels for risk. And another big mistake I see organizations making is they say, well, okay, we're in the banking business, so we're a financial institution, we're inherently conservative, and our risk posture is conservative on everything. Well, that's wrong, okay? any organization, whether it's in banking or any other industry, I don't mean to pick on banking here, should have a risk position that varies depending on the area that we're talking about. So, for example, if we're talking about an area where we are looking to create new capabilities, then we're inherently going to be willing to take more risk in an area like that than in another area where we are making more, I'll say, evolutionary enhancements to an existing well-established practice. Your tolerance for risk would naturally be lower in that kind of an area, appropriately so. So you want to make selective choices about which areas you want to take higher risks in consciously and which areas of the business you deliberately want to be more conservative in. That would be the more appropriate way to think about risk. And again, you want it to be well managed regardless. Other comments or questions, thoughts? Probably need to drive toward closure here pretty soon as well. Any
Okay,
final?
Henry, in the chat, Henry says, I like having risk positions. That is interesting. Our department tends to want to avoid risk rather than manage it.
Yeah, it's a pretty common scenario there, Henry, and certainly avoiding risk in those areas that you decide to be deliberately conservative makes some degree of sense. But again, deciding where, it's often those innovation areas where we're willing to consciously take more risk. So it's in those areas make sense where you're trying to create a sustainable competitive advantage, where you see an opportunity for that. And you can often look at the classic three-dimensional model. I believe it was Porter that put it forth. Do you want to be primarily operationally efficient? Do you want to focus on product innovation? Or what's the third one off the top of my head here? Operation efficiency. Oh, customer intimacy is the third one. In which of those three is going to be your primary focus for competitive advantage? You got to have kind of a minimum basis in the other two. Sometimes you can be strong in 2 out of the 3, but that's for the more advanced case. Typically, there's going to be one that you focus on. And that's going to be probably the area that a lot of your innovation activities would be biased toward, because it's going to be your competitive advantage area.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Hey, this is Steve Grunch again. I just had a quick comment. I work for USCIS, and our CIO, Mark Schwartz, has actually spoke on this topic of, innovation from an enterprise level or business level at several of the DevOps conferences and things like that around the country. And one of the speeches that he gave, he actually says that, he actually made the point that actually more frequent changes and changes at a smaller scale actually lead to more stability. It's, kind of taking off of some of, Deming's work and things like that. And that's kind of like the direction that our organization's going in. If you have any comments about that, I'd like to hear it.
I generally agree. I think it demands I'll say a reasonably mature change management discipline, so that these more frequent changes can be introduced to a production environment in a controlled and managed way, so that you're not introducing perturbations to stability that can cause more problems, with unintended consequences. So, the more incremental approach inherently has less risk with each incremental change than the more big bang approach, right? Where you bet the farm on one big change, once a year or twice a year or whatever it is. So yeah, as long as the change management is strong to go with it, that tends to work well.
Jeff has a comment. Jeff, you have a mic too. You want to talk? Evidently not.
There. Okay, it took me. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Were you talking to
okay,
the
sorry.
to the dead mic? Yeah.
No, it just took me a while to unmute it. Well, yeah, like I said in the comment bar there,
You're a fan already.
It really struck me as odd. It just struck me as odd to hear that perhaps EA is perceived as at odds with managing innovation, because that's kind of what I was hoping to get out of it. I'm actually in the production operations organization in my company. I'm not in the IT organization. I'm not in an EA organization, but I'm in the manufacturing technology organization within my company, and deal a lot with our manufacturing systems. And we are now trying to figure out how to get a grip on things like the Internet of Things, big data, advanced analytics, cloud computing, augmented reality, the convergence of IT and OT, and it's pretty intimidating to try to get your arms around all this stuff. So it became obvious to me that I need to get some help and some education on an approach to organizing our thoughts and our activities around all these things. So that's what I was counting on EA for, actually.
And indeed, EA done well provides a structured way of thinking through making decisions in all of those areas. As long as the facilitators of the EA process are engaging subject matter experts in each of those areas you listed as part of the teams that deal with thinking through the architectural implications and content that belongs, in the architecture that addresses those topical areas that you had raised. That lines up nicely. I think you'll find that it helps guide and direct the problem solving in those areas quite nicely. For example, when I was at Corning, we extended the EA discipline to go beyond just the boundaries of IT and include engineering. And the engineering organization typically owned systems, factory floor systems, and those kinds of things, even if they included computers, which they did. And so we used EA to be a bridge builder essentially between the IT and OT worlds to look at how we can better synergize between them and take advantage of the innovation and standards, but then also bridge those worlds and allow the classical IT space to leverage a lot of the voluminous data coming out of the factory floor. And indeed, you might argue that was a form of a big data problem even back then, before we called it big data. And certainly today's trend with the Internet of Things takes that to an even much more magnified level. So yeah, I think you've got the right perspective there, and it's encouraging to hear somebody with your background and from your part of the organization thinking about this discipline that way. That's not common, I would say.
Yeah, well, in fact, we've also discussed earlier in the course, the importance of where the EA organization is perched within the enterprise. And unfortunately, in my company, there's a little small EA group that is buried 3 layers deep in the IT organization. So, they're not really functioning as I've learned in this course EA should. And so I'm, from my position in production operations, actually trying to light a fire under the EA organization to engage in EA with me, and to do that.
Well, and I love that. I would encourage you to also light a fire under your own leadership and the leadership of IT, not just the EA group. I think there's 2 things. One is the EA function should report to the C-suite. That's the best practice. And so if it's not, that's an opportunity. But I would say more important than where it reports is that we need to be doing the right things with the right people. And you can do that theoretically from wherever they sit organizationally. That's easier to do in some organizational cultures than others. Where it reports sends an implied message, and so the organization may or may not be able to get over that unless an organizational change is made. But yeah, I like where you're thinking.
I think
okay,
we're going to have to
Professor
wrap that
Ocker,
part up.
Yeah.
I'm the timekeeper, the keeper of the clock. So we all really appreciate your time, Scott, and I look forward to having you back in class next semester too. So everyone is sending you great thanks, and they'll have the recording so they can listen to it, and you've helped enrich our evening, Scott, so thank you.
Appreciate the engagement. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Okay, now, big data. Do you have a presentation? Who should I give moderator rights to?
Dr. Ocker, this is Mike Wolonsky. I was going to upload the deck. So if you want
right.
the rights, then that'd be good.
Right. Where are you? Michael.
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 So yeah,
Got
near
it.
the bottom. I always am.
I see you. Oops, I gave the rights to. Giving the rights to everybody but you.
Yeah.
You have them now? Okay,
yeah,
great. All right.
I upload it right now, and then Jonathan will get us kicked off here. So just let me get the file uploaded.
And thanks everyone for being flexible with this. I didn't have Scott on the schedule to begin with, but he offered his time to us, and I thought we should take advantage of that. So team, whenever you're ready, big data team, take it away.
It's it's uploading right now, so it should be done here in the next couple seconds.
Great.
So maybe in the interest of dead air, I will test my microphone and introduce myself. My name's Jonathan Potter. I work at Ford Motor Company, actually with Sue Kopek. I think Sue's probably more vocal than me. You all might recognize her name. But I spent last year in infrastructure architecture, and I specifically worked on big data and analytics. So I was pretty excited that I got this choice to be on this team. Right, I see the first slide. Do I have the ability to transition to the next slide? Or do I need to do something, Dr. Ocker?
You need moderator rights to do that. So Jonathan, H-I-J-K, Jonathan. There you go.
Yep.
You should be able to do it now.
Yep, great. Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
Great. And we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So there are 5 of us on our team. I think you can see our names there. All right. Everybody see the agenda, I assume? All right. I'll kick us off, talk some about introduction, big data. I think a lot of you are already familiar with the concepts. We won't spend a lot of time there. We really want to focus our conversation tonight around enterprise architecture and how we can support big data initiatives. So to that end, we'll start with a review of the survey results, get an understanding of sort of your organizations, the people in the class, and how you responded to that survey. And then Mason's going to talk some about big data, big commitment. So really talking about the commitment that's required if you're going to undertake a big data initiative. It does require a significant level of commitment, and he'll speak some about that. We'll also talk some about skills gaps, our workforce, and the need to have skills to support big data. And then I'm going to talk some about connecting analytics and how you bring insight to big data. Then we'll talk some about security and cloud concepts. And then we'll get some specific with some examples of organizations that have utilized big data in the past and how they've utilized it. And then we'll have a conclusion and close. So one brief slide here on introduction. As we all know, big data is an emerging and disruptive technology that's really top of mind for a lot of organizations. It has the potential for unprecedented business insight. And when we talk about enterprise architecture supporting big data, our role is really to ensure that the investments in big data capability are aligned with business strategy to achieve their full potential. Again, this is another disruptive, shiny technology, and we want to be sure that as we're chasing some new technology that is providing business value and how it can align to our enterprise strategy. So one of the challenges that tended to come up over and over again as we researched was really just how you address the exponential growth. So I included this chart in the lower right. There's a report that says today, all of the data in the world, right, global data in the universe is at like 2.8 zettabytes in 2012. And the expectation is it would grow to 40 zettabytes by 2020. So in 8 years, that's what you see in the graph to the right. So just incredible exponential growth. And how do you deal with that? And then the last bullet there, much of the data growth will come from new types of data, and machine generated data is expected to increase 15 times by 2020. So that's really one of the large drivers for this large volume of data. Great, so I'm going to hand it over now, and Mason, I think you're going to take us through their survey results.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. Could you pass me the moderator? I think you can select right by my name, right next to it, and it should be able to pass me the moderator. All right, thank you. So just kind of our survey results, a quick overview. We had 36 respondents, 97% of the participants indicated that their organization has undertaken a project that's changed the way that data was stored, acquired, processed. Unfortunately, we didn't have the foresight to ask specifically if this was within the last 6 months, last year or two, because obviously a lot of it just kind of goes for the nature of data is always changing, the way we store it, everything like that. So our first questions here, we want to kind of gauge where our peers, the class we're at in terms of organizational size. So to do that, we asked 2 questions to kind of get a better idea of that scale, that scope. The first question is, how large is your organization in terms of employees? And we discovered that quite a few of you, 81% of you, are in fact working at organizations that are 1,000 employees in size or larger. However, only 61% of our respondents come from organizations that have a dedicated team for data analysis of 10 or more people. If we add in the smaller data teams, we see that 72% of respondents have any data analysis team at all, including the not sure responses, or I mean, not including them. The logic seems to kind of come easily. You know, if most of our classmates come from large organizations, then, you know, those organizations can't afford data scientists. They can afford to have the luxury of these, you know, big, expensive data projects. So here, our next slide of what we got is we want to determine if big data was part of the overall future business strategy. And the answer is pretty obvious, resounding yes, with 81% of you. However, the number shifts to be a bit lower when we ask the question about EA's involvement in the big data initiative, where a lot of our respondents were not quite sure. So whether this is a failure of the EA team to communicate its role in the enterprise, or, you know, its handling of big data projects, or maybe currently people, because EA or big data is so new that EA hasn't really taken a hold of it, hasn't really started thinking future models. So that is kind of interesting that people are not sure where EA and big data are in their organization right now in relationship to each other. So our sixth question, if your organization utilizes big data and has the initiative created a competitive advantage, really generated 2 close to equal responses in yes and not sure, with 16 and 13 respectively. What's more interesting, to me at least, is that we have 3 respondents that report that there was no big data, no competitive advantage that they perceived. So a question for the class is, if big data has not created a competitive advantage, is it because the big data initiatives just failed? I would really like to have one of the 3 respondents who selected no on the survey participate and share their why they felt like, you know, there was no competitive advantage to big data initiatives in their organization. But because it's so few people, I don't know if anyone will want to speak up. So if you've worked in a previous organization that had a big data initiative that kind of failed, and I would love to hear why you perceive that to be the case. So if anyone, you can say in the chat, you can stay on the microphone. It'd be great if someone could just speak up. And
hi, Mason. This is Veena.
Hi, Veena.
I think I was one of the ones who answered no to this. The reason I said no is it's not because of a failure. It's because we did not have proper business cases where we could prove that it added value. And on top of it, in the oil and gas industry, I think everyone is struggling to have a big win when it comes to big data. And that is where I said no, because we did not get any kind of competitive advantage out of it. The only thing we got out of it is we got to know end to end how to use the system, how to get the data into the system, process it, and extract it. Nothing beyond that. And our organization is small when compared to other oil and gas industry leaders.
Thanks, Veena. So that kind of goes with the idea that, I mean, because big data is so new, that how do we, get good results? How do we get that competitive advantage? A lot of companies are kind of struggling with that, and again, it's going to be a learning process. So it's probably not a failure for a lot of companies, but it's kind of a work in progress, so to speak, where you haven't gotten yet that competitive advantage.
Correct. Correct.
All right. Moving on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
There's a comment from Ram in the chat. Can you see it?
Yep. Thanks, Ram. Competitive advantage, but I believe the failure would be if organization goes about adopting big data, since everyone in the competition is doing that. Okay. Yeah, that again, kind of that makes sense. It's kind of a it's not necessarily at the failure state. Does anyone else have anything else to say on this subject or this question?
I'll just say it was a bit of a leap of faith at Ford. I know that there were high-level stakeholders who were very concerned about justification of the expense. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think that is the industry as a whole is struggling with that piece of it.
And Henry Muller here has a tale as old as time. You get some data and you go, who's going to look at this? Who's going to make sense of it? And what sense can we make of it? It's a struggle. And again, people are learning that, and there's new ways to look at data too that are coming in the pipe. Machine learning, et cetera. So it's these things keep changing, and we got to kind of wrap our heads around it. So I'm going to go ahead to the next slide here, unless anyone has any last minute questions on that. But our next question was basically about the Internet of Things. So last week or 2 weeks ago, I suppose, a few weeks ago, we kind of learned about the Internet of Things. And so how does it tie into big data initiatives these days? So we wanted to ask, does your organization utilize the Internet of Things for data collection? Less people were not sure about this one, but if the survey still trends towards yes, that many companies do incorporate the Internet of Things into their data collection already. I have two quick more questions for the class. If you just want to type it in chat, that's fine. Probably not going to read too many of them out loud, but I just think it's interesting that for the people that did answer yes to this question, I was just kind of wondering what type of Internet of Things devices were your companies, leveraging for their data collection.
This is Eugene Eschbach. So I work in construction, and we actually have devices on all of our large construction equipment, like the excavators and the bulldozers and stuff. And, we geofence those things so we know where they are. It fights against theft protection, that sort of stuff. It's kind of like a little bit of LoJack with GPS on it. But also it feeds us, performance metrics, like when does it need preventative maintenance, and how many hours does it have on it versus how many hours are reported on it, and things like that. So basically all of our equipment is connected. It's pretty slick, and it's enabled us to cut the amount of staff mechanics we have. We can definitely cut some of the office staff, and let the computer decide when it needs preventative maintenance instead of us having to go around and check every machine. Especially if our footprints across 5-6 states.
Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, it looks like in the comments a lot of similar responses. Basically devices that can monitor on the machinery itself. I'm going to kind of skip that next question and go to the next slide here where so we also wanted to gather some information about business units that may be utilizing big data, and not surprisingly, marketing is by and far the heavy hitter here with 31% reporting its usage. I didn't include the other field where people could type in what they wanted, because a lot of the responses for the other field were kind of a combination of the 1 through 6. And our 10th question, does your EA organization foster communication between traditional IT and data science analyst role in the business? The answer here is fairly accurately reflects, our previous questions regarding EA and big data. There's kind of a confusion there. So a lot of uncertainty about the role of EA and its role with big data. Almost, I believe that's the exact same number of yes responses as the previous question related to EA and big data. And our final question we included here is, if your organization has a big data strategy, what does it look like? 25% of our respondents have either not incorporated big data on an enterprise level, leaving it to either specific business units, or they've not undertaken it at all. So the majority, however, 67%, have started to either roll out big data initiatives, on an enterprise level, or at least multiple business units, and they have that kind of top-down, outcome-driven strategy. We had 2 other responses, which I also included here. But I'm going to move on from the survey portion and just kind of jump into talking about commitments. So one of our key findings here is that through the research we've done was that there's going to be a lot of commitment to big data, financially first and foremost, because big data is not cheap and it's evolving. We live in a culture that embraces new ways to gamify data creation for advertisers, businesses. So what the EA team has to be conscientious of is this financial cost, this ever-growing capital requirement. So kind of breaking down to this three points, there are 3 sort of commitments that we want to highlight, both financial, for the data gathering and storage, and for the resources that it'll take to analyze it. There's data scientists. So there's a commitment to continued education for stakeholders on what this emerging trend is and where it's heading, with the likes of machine learning, Internet of Things. And lastly, the enterprise architecture team has to be prepared and involved in the project. So big data is transformational in nature. It acts as kind of like the pivot on the lever. So, it's very important that the EA team is involved with it and understands the future, kind of like they can scope it out and know what it is. So to talk about the increase in big data spending, there's this massive expenditure now, and Jaspersoft surveyed a list of stakeholders and C-level executives who reported an increase in research commitment in 2014 for big data. So not surprising, because a petabyte Hadoop cluster requiring around 200 nodes can cost about $1 million. This is hard to put into context without knowing how much data a company uses. So Yahoo, for example, is certainly a heavy user of data, manages around 200 petabytes. So you can imagine that this scales. These numbers are probably a lot smaller when they were written than they are today, because as our introduction talks about, data is just growing at such a massive rate. But again, so if you take into the financial scope, if it still costs $1 million for 1 petabyte, your company might be generating a lot more data in the future. It's going to be a lot of expense. And the expense is not just in the data warehousing and stuff. You're going to have data scientists. So here's just a quick slide on, it's a little outdated, but it's a national salary trend. So between 2012 and 2014, there's a fairly significant earnings growth for just the keyword data scientists here. This correlates with the rise in big data. So one of the sources I had stated that big data scientists were earning on average $123,000 a year. That number, I believe, has fallen a little bit, but that's still pretty telling of the need. And there's got demand. And so when there's that demand, costs rise. So with big data, we want to start small. So one of the lessons I learned from my research was that enterprise architecture perspective that you take, it just needs to start small. You need to do manageable. Your future state models should probably address a few business outcomes or needs with the data initiatives. There's fail points that are not related to the financial commitment a company can make. A great example is the UK National Health Service. They wanted to consolidate all of their patient data, and the project was scrapped after costing taxpayers an estimated $14.9 billion. So they had the money, they had the capital, they were definitely committed there. But it's you have to be manageable. You have to think And I mean, again, it actually transitions right into the next slide that there needs to be a stakeholder understanding of what they're doing. Just in 2012, the survey of 51% of executives or key stakeholders responded that they didn't fully understand the big data project. Again, I think this is really interesting because I personally believe that in the last 2 years is when most of the big data projects started. So I just want to do a quick poll of the class. So did your big data initiative start within the last 2 years? And I only want people to answer this that have big data, projects. So should get a little poll pop up if you want to just. I'll wait about 10 more seconds here. And I'm going to close it. So it kind of goes with at least what I was thinking and expecting, that we see here 75% of you that did have data projects that responded to this little poll started within the last 2 years. So it's kind of crazy to think 3 years ago, 51% of people that were involved in this stuff didn't know what they were really, doing, at least in total. And now there's courses offered specifically towards C-level executives like the Harvard Business Schools, competing on business analytics and big data. Again, directly, directed completely towards the C-level. So it's for people that are the decision makers. We need to keep them apprised, understanding of what these investments are. They're not going to drop $14.9 billion into, a well. So commitment from the big data from the EA team. From the EA perspective, we want to be prepared and committed to create future state models that can handle the fluctuation of data warehouses, both internally or cloud vendors. Our architects need to look at the future trends that could radically change the way we perceive big data. Will the Internet of Things make a petabyte a day for your organization? Will you just be generating so much data in the coming years? You have to be prepared for that, and definitely make sure your future state models can reflect that potential. So will machine learning help or cut costs? Will you need as many data scientists if we have really advanced machine learning models? And lastly here, just some recommendations. It's ultimately the EA team has to just be prepared for the future states to reflect the varying amounts of capital committed to big data, as well as the data amount that the enterprise is going to be generating or utilizing. And so not just the EA team needs to be committed to knowing what this is, it has to be an understanding on a larger scale, like executives, or at least they have to have some level of semblance of understanding, the CIO, et cetera. A lot of people have created these kind of new positions to help the C-level understand. So I'm going to pass it on to Mike, and he's going to talk about the skill gap in these new positions. Mike, are you there?
I am. Yeah, thanks, Mason. You want to make me a presenter, or so I can flip the slides? Or can I do that?
I don't know how I give you the presenter here. Give me 1 second.
I think Dr. Ocker may have to do it. You could just drive if you want. Okay.
I got it here. Yep. Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm going to go to the next slide here. So what I'm going to talk about here is the skills gap that's resulting from big data. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, I got you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so just talk a little bit about the skills gap that's emerging from the growing big data into organizations here. So, basically the key finding here is that big data is driving the need for new types and combinations of skills, so that big data, that data that's being collected, can be turned into some kind of value to the organization. So with EA sitting in the position it's in, typically in organizations it has a unique sits in a unique position to be able to help address the talent gap.
Can anybody hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
I wonder if we just lost
So,
Mike.
yeah, perhaps. Michael.
Well, so I'm not sure I can present Mike's part. I could jump onto my section maybe, and if Mike gets back on.
Yes.
All
Why
right.
don't we
This is
do that?
all right. This is Jonathan Potter. Maybe Dr. Ocker, if you could make me presenter again.
Yep. Just a sec.
Maybe his cat jumped on his keyboard or something. That's usually what happens to me.
me too. You got it now, Jonathan.
All right, thank you. So we'll jump onto my section. So I'll make this brief. I found this great long 30-page Gartner paper that talked about connecting analytics, and basically the punchline is, without analytics, big data is really just a collection of data that lacks business insight. And it made the case that by now, as Mason was saying earlier, over the last 2 years, a lot of enterprises, if not most, have figured out how to collect data and to throw it into, say, Hadoop or your big data store of choice. So now really the next challenge is, how do we get insight out of this data? How do we connect analytics to our big data lakes, if you're familiar with that concept, a big data lake? And the way the paper recommended doing that was using reference architectures or architectural patterns. So I don't want to get too technical in this conversation, but I'll show you what the paper was recommending. So these are 4 different reference architectures, and the idea is, as an architect or as an enterprise architect, you could recommend one of these architecture patterns for implementation. And the important thing here is to understand what your business needs are and what your enterprise strategy is, so that you can select an appropriate reference architecture. And again, I'm not going to give 30 pages worth of information here, but essentially the single tier architecture on the left is a very simplistic model, where the concept is you can do analytics within Hadoop. So this is often the quickest to establish. It can be done at low cost, but there are some obvious trade-offs. And so one of the most visible is its limited applicability and contribution to analytical silos. So you may have a product development group that throws out a Hadoop cluster and does their own analytics on it. You may have a marketing team that does the same, and you're back in this fragmented enterprise perspective. So you have to consider that. At the far other end of the spectrum on the right side is a fully blown out, fully fleshed logical data warehouse, where you have Hadoop as one of your data source, but then you also have your traditional and other data sources as well. And then they meet together in a logical data warehouse upon which you can do analytics. So really, this provides a relatively user-friendly, can provide relatively user-friendly business intelligence features. So business users who aren't data scientists, et cetera, would be able to use tools like, say, Tableau or ClickView, if you're familiar with some of those tool sets, to do business intelligence on big data, but would also support advanced analytics features for data scientists and statisticians. Just based on the design, by design, right? This eliminates the concern with the siloed data. So all the data is in a single data lake, and you've eliminated the silo problem. The negative trade-off here is the logical data warehouse is higher cost, and it's really the greater duration to establish. So this is the most complex. And then of course the ones in the middle are sort of a hybrid of the two, with similar hybridized advantages and disadvantages. So in closing this section, the recommendations of the paper, it also goes through to spend a great deal of time. I don't know if you can see it, this slide didn't come out too well, but in the left-hand column there are 4 groups of assessment criteria. So this is really understanding your enterprise's needs. The paper did say, do engage enterprise architecture. They actually called out enterprise architects, so it wasn't just technology focused paper, because enterprise architects have that bigger perspective of what the enterprise strategy is and the enterprise needs, and then use the enterprise architects to have a discussion around what are those 4 different, they have 4 different categories of assessment criteria. You can see user-centric, analysis, data access, and operational criteria. So based on those criteria, you can select the reference architecture that's the best fit for your organization. And just in my brief time in architecture and in this research, you see over and over again the importance of fit for purpose solutions, this concept of selecting a solution that fits your business needs. And that's really what this paper was all about. So the link will be in the material if you all need some hands-on guidance. I thought it did a pretty good job of that. All right, I think that's it for my section. So Mike, are you back on the line by chance?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I apologize for that too.
We can jump back to your section.
Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. Let me go back to, yeah, I think, again, I apologize for that, Murphy struck. I think it was this slide here where just found a couple interesting studies that found just kind of give the numbers around the gap that exists, or the issue with the skills gap here. Or in the U.S., about 150,000 jobs requiring deep, like and over 1 million, just general data type knowledge were going unfilled. This was a couple of years ago, so it's probably more dramatic now. In the UK, also a similar story where they saw a survey or a study saw that the growth in big data related staffing was expected to go up dramatically. And just kind of tie it back to the class survey, there's a question on a team dedicated to data analysis there. So like I think Mason said earlier, it kind of makes sense with our large, relatively large employee base for most of the companies that we'd have a team of the biggest category would have the biggest contribution there. I'm going to move on here, and this kind of didn't work out here with the formatting here a little bit. It's a little overlap, but so how can EA help with this skills gap here? And you kind of see here, I thought this picture was kind of interesting, and also it was interesting that Scott mentioned about the bimodal EA and this vanguard kind of mode of enterprise architecture, where maybe this is what he was kind of referring to, where EA sits in this interesting or kind of mission where has knowledge of business investment opportunities, understands the architecture, understands ramifications across the company. And so one of the recommendations that we found was that an assessment should be done on big data skill gap across all the business lines of business and business teams. And EA is a good organization to help with that. Another recommendation is to categorize the tools that are used in big data in all the facets: collection, analysis, and management, and align the tool selection with the roles that the big data roles that are needed. And then found this kind of interesting this new role of chief data officer, and again EA participating in the evaluation of whether that's a position that's warranted in the organization. And I'll talk a little bit more about that position in a minute. Down at the bottom here, just again tying it back to the survey, into your EA organization engaged in the big data initiative. Over half of the respondents said yes, and I won't go into more detail. Mason kind of already covered that question. All right, I thought this picture was kind of interesting here, showing the kind of relationship of how some of these new positions relate to some of the existing positions within a company. So the key here is the kind of these pink figures here are related to big data roles. So a data steward, an analytics architect, and a data scientist. And then in each of these circles here, showing how they're interacting or supporting the more traditional tech roles in the insight area here, supporting business users. The data scientist is in the data and applications area. The steward is supporting or working with the developers, and then the analytics architect is working with the business users in the discovery and visualization. And then, so just wanted to share a little bit of the information captured on the different types of roles that I found in the research that were related to big data. Again, the chief data officer is also referred to as the chief analytics officer. This role is their job is trying to find new digital revenue from the data that's been collected and analyzed. This position can refer to or report to the CIO, could report to the lines of businesses, like the leaders in the lines of business. It just depends. Analytics architect, this was the position on the previous slide. It was kind of like a solutions architect specific to big data related implementations. And then the data scientist, this is the role that I think I at least most closely associate with big data. When you think of big data and new roles, you hear data scientist, and Mason already alluded to that with the growing, I guess, salary trend for data scientist positions. And so this role is focused on a kind of a combination of skills in computer science, mathematics, and statistics. And there's even a further segmentation that was found on the types of data scientists. So people more focused on product and profit business people with maybe those are business, data creative, more working on visualization, the developers writing the code, and then the researchers using tools to yield insight. These were, we said, typically from PhD level mathematics backgrounds. A question from Brian in the chat: was there any discussion on where we will get all these new data scientists from? I don't think I have a good answer for that.
I can jump in. Do you want me to jump in? I would just say this is Rosalie Acker. I would just say that from a education standpoint, universities are standing up as fast as they can data scientists, data science majors, and graduate programs in data science. So Penn State will be starting as a cross college between liberal arts, where math and statistics are, and computer science, and IST is involved in a joint degree program in data science that will begin, I believe, next year. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah,
I'm done.
I would imagine the universities are scrambling to meet that need. So that's interesting. And then the last two kind of unique positions that I found in the research were a data steward, or also a data custodian, kind of the go-to person that knows about the fitness of the data. And then a data journalist. This is a role more in the journalist kind of field, but somebody that's able to manipulate big data to tell a story, both through words and pictures, that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. And thought it was interesting here that Northwestern's got now a scholarship that's trying to entice developers into this more kind of journalist field. So thought that was kind of interesting. Just real quick, any other positions from anybody on the call here tonight from your real life experience that wouldn't fit in one of these categories that you have in your organization? Maybe? All right. Well, maybe not then. Maybe that covers the gamut there. Data manager. Okay. Davina, you have a data manager. That's something that wouldn't fit in one of these categories. like it could be a data steward or a data custodian, but maybe that's something slightly different. All right, in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and move forward here. So that concludes the skills gap discussion. I'm going to hand it over to Ketan to talk about connecting analytics.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. All right. Am I audible?
Yep, I can hear you.
All right, cool. Let me just move forward to my slides. All right, so we did some research on the big data, and we thought we should present the security and cloud aspect to it. And these are the key findings which we found. Inevitably, right, big data is the current industry buzzword, and it has got a lot of potential to change the way data is stored, processed, and analyzed. And this is the sole reason why a growing number of organizations, as we discussed, are already using it or on the verge of using this technology. And here we are talking about petabytes and terabytes of data to gain better insights of the business. And then we also found this interesting sort of information ownership versus data ownership from a security standpoint. So basically, what information owners are, they represent the line of business owners who are basically the people who are going to consume the data to either connect to the other data structures or a different data topology, or to visualize using a BI or analytics tool. On the other hand, data owners are basically a representation of organizations' IT group. It could be in chunks, which basically deal with the raw data, which is what we call as structured and unstructured data. And so we already discussed a little bit on the security roles and the expertise required from a big data perspective. It is pretty highly likely that people will move to cloud eventually, and in fact, there are a handful of companies which have those required skills and expertise, and even funds to implement such and implement and manage such huge databases with structured and unstructured data. So as per the key findings, I think cloud is the way forward, and tremendous amount of companies are moving forward. I can just talk about my company. We spent about $4 billion on the Azure just in FY15 on just innovation piece, and not just building the Azure. So there's tremendous amount of money which companies are putting in to make sure that it is secure and utilized by all the mid and big size companies. And of course, we do hear a lot about the data breaching. We all know about the Target, which costs about $110 million. To the Target, it has exposed a lot of personal information. JP Morgan Chase. There's a lot of reputational loss, and I think it included around 75 million worth of information. So the whole topic here is we need to make sure from a holistic perspective that we are utilizing all the security benefits, and we are utilizing in the right way from the company's perspective. And so I just put this small small screenshot on that. I just liked it. It basically just shows that all the companies are moving towards this next exit called big data. A few of them are slow, few of them have already took the exit, and some of them are moving really fast to take that. And inevitably, you can see in the background there are clouds in it, so it kind of captures the idea. Moving forward, let me just. All right, so here is the analysis what we have done from a challenges and business problems perspective. So the idea here is basically the analysis is on two pillars. One is the big data challenges. We all discussed on top. Not sure if I can expand it just. right. So sorry about that. So I'll just call it out. So I think from the big data challenges perspective, the topmost is determining how to get the value out of big data. And I heard on the call Veena and Ram and folks like that. They already talked about how to identify the value of big data. So that is one of the key challenges. The other is defining the strategy. Oftentimes, the big data projects do fail, and they start as a proof of concepts, but they do fail because of a lack of strategy, lack of interest. They do not have a specific future state envisioned at the starting. So these are the causes of failures, which we have seen in our company as well. And then integration of multiple data sources. In today's heterogeneous world, right, there's a lot of complexity in terms of which technology to choose from, what are different aspects of customization stuff. So I guess these are the biggest challenges from a big data perspective, which every company is currently, is facing it. Now coming back to the business problems which big data addresses, I think the biggest is the enhanced customer experience, and then it increases the efficiency and it introduces predictive analysis, which is a big thing. For example, now we are talking about call centers can be made more effective and efficient by just capitalizing on what the company can know about the caller ahead of time, even before the caller is calling. We are talking about airlines, which can quickly correlate, which can understand their ID, their book flights, their flight status, and they may be able to determine why the caller is calling even before the second ring, and then sentimental analysis and whatnot. So these are pretty increasing benefits people want to get out of big data. And based on this analysis, I just figured out, sort of key points, which are, the way forward is basically the business drivers for having a big data, which basically involves a lot of strategic planning and security governance. We should have a clear differentiation between the traditional data versus the big data, because the tools and technologies change accordingly. We should have a specific strategy and value discussion ahead of time, even before thinking and discussing about how to implement a big data. There should be a proper cost analysis. We should think of cloud security. We should have proper line of businesses and big data tools identified in order to get a successful planning and implementation of big data. All right, so based on the analysis, this is what I we figured out the recommendations could be, and this is where the enterprise architecture can improve the overall strategy, value, and implementation. So the first is creating an overall strategy, basically using big data to enhance cybersecurity. We should have specific desired outcomes. We should have stakeholders buy-ins. We should have all the data gatherings and analysis to be done from the data analytical perspective. We should have inventory of available internal and external data sources. We should define policies, policies such as security as well, which basically defines the authentication, authorization, and access controls. We should also define a line of business segregation within the big data. And then we should have cloud computing technologies evaluation done to ahead of time. As you can see, there's a lot of companies who have already started moving big into the big data space. So there's a lot of evaluation needs to be done. There's a lot of research needs to be done on a holistic way with our business and our data in mind. And then we had to investigate what applications are the right candidates for big data, right? For example, as we discussed in our analysis, that usually the marketing is the one who are the biggest contenders of big data. So I think we need to select the right applications from the business perspective and get those right tools to consume a lot of big data. So any questions? All right, so that's it from my side. Let me hold it back to, is it Jonathan?
So Steve is going to take us through this part.
Sure.
Okay, thanks. If you can give me
Sure.
presenter rights. Okay, great.
Sure.
All right. So what we found in our research was that a lot of companies that engaged in big data projects, when they were successful, they had a few key characteristics. And usually what happens is that they had very specific questions that had a cause and effect answer, right? If I do this, will this result from it? Or if I make this change, what will be the result of the change? The answer also was directly related to a strategy objective, as we will see in the examples in the next few slides, is that they asked questions related to their profit. What can I do to make my company more profitable? If I change a policy, or I am proposing a policy, how will that affect user sentiment, things of this nature? And then we also found that the answer to the question that they were asking was measurable, right? So we have a baseline situation, and the way that the question is framed, or the way that the data is represented, shows a clear either improvement or degradation from where the baseline started. Okay, so the general types of questions that were answered were, like I said, change in sentiment. How does the population, or how does the customer feel about a certain change or policy? Did the new product, did the new service that was implemented, did it have an improvement in customer service? The impact of a change or policy. And then other examples were utilization of resources. If I know where a particular problem is, or let's say if I know where resources need to be deployed, I can be more proactive about it. So these were the kinds of projects that kind of got set up. And then, of course, you have the last example is creating or defining which variables in the data can be processed out that would actually lead to profitability of the organization. So this next slide is into the first example organization that kind of did this. This is the government of Malaysia. Implemented several big data analytic pilot application projects, and as you see in the first in these example projects, you see what kinds of questions that they were trying to ask. So the first one is that they're using multiple data sources, both inside of their organization and external to them, just to watch price of goods. And they say, well, why are they doing that, right? Is because they want to find out how monetary policy, as it's implemented in their country, is being affected by by people setting prices too high for profiteering purposes, or whether the prices are being set too low, etc. Then the second one is an example of consumer sentiment or constituent sentiment. whenever a proposal is made in a change of law, they want to know how the population is feeling about this, so they aggregate data from what they call an open data source platform, which is a combination of social media, chat boards, discussion boards, and things like that from local newspapers or news organizations, and they feed all of this in and try to come up with a sentiment of how that particular policy is working within the country. The third and fourth examples are questions that were asked about basically about how resources were being utilized, right? If we know where crime is being committed, or if there's a certain concentration of where crime is happening, we can better deploy resources to mitigate those types of problems, and respond more quickly, things of this nature. And then the last one, again, is about the infectious disease outbreak, right? Obviously, as a government and having a population that is very transient or having a lot of business people come into the area, they're concerned about the spread of infectious diseases and being able to allocate resources quick enough to be able to respond to that. So these were the types of projects that were initiated by the government and kind of fed into these concepts of how do I improve customer service, how do I manage resources effectively, and what are the real-time implications of a policy or product that I put out in the marketplace. Okay, so the next one, and I'm sure everybody's asking me, like, okay, why are you going to talk about dairy farming and all of this kind of stuff? So it turns out that that a dairy farm came to the Fujitsu Corporation and asked them how to make their dairy farm more profitable. And the answer to the question came back that if you can determine when a cow's estuary cycle starts, or basically when the cow is in heat and is ready for breeding, you can actually increase your milk production. And of course, if so the milk production and the cow becoming pregnant are all tied to the profitability of the dairy farm. Well, and this project is very interesting because it lays at an intersection of the Internet of Things. In order to collect the data from the cows, a ankle bracelet was placed on the cow's leg to measure the number of steps that the cow took. The data was fed into the Microsoft Azure cloud platform, and the machine learning algorithms were used to process the data. So it's a very good use case, or very interesting use case for all of these different elements that are combined together. And anyway, so what they found was that when the cow's estuary cycle starts, or when the cow goes in heat, the number of steps increases dramatically from a baseline, as you can see in the graph on the chart. And based upon the dairy farmer's knowledge of his business and the data research that was done, or the data scientist research, they found that if the cow got pregnant within 16 hours of this marker, that they actually had a 65% chance, 65 to 70% chance of the cow becoming pregnant. And this was an improvement over kind of like the intuition, I guess, of the farmer, or the traditional methods of determining when cows were pregnant. It was it was a jump of almost 30% over what was happening before. Also, using the new technology of the data aggregation and finding the number of steps the cow was taking, they actually increased the probability of the cow becoming pregnant, or they increased the detection rate of when the cow could become pregnant to almost 95% accuracy in determining when the cow was pregnant. So obviously all of these types of things, all this type of information led directly to an increase in profitability of the company. So out of this information, and specifically this example, it's kind of an unlikely example of where big data projects could be found. But at the end of the day, what we were looking at is that companies, regardless of what they sell today, or what kind of companies they are, at the end of the day, they become data companies, right? There's actually a quote in one of our sources that said that we were a dairy farm and now we are a data company. They're a data company because the data has to be managed, or the data that they're generating is directly driving profit for that company. So that's one way in which companies become data companies. The other way that we saw is that data actually becomes an asset for the company itself, right? So in this scenario, or in this type of environment, the insight that is generated actually becomes a marketable asset or an additional product that can be sold by that company. And in doing so, the company becomes a data company, in addition to maybe some other products or services that they offer. The other way that we see that companies become data companies is by actually using the data that they generate, or the insight that they generate, and using that as a strategic advantage, or in one case, they're actually using it as a weapon against their competition. So the conclusions that we reached, obviously, the organization has to have a question or small sets of questions that are considered critical to their mission or their strategic objectives. They review current and future big data initiatives to determine if the required managerial, technical, interdisciplinary roles exist to set up big data projects. Stakeholder education is paramount to good decisions and making the big data initiatives work. And organizations should be prepared to commit significant capital to big data initiatives. Questions? I think. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Very interesting. Thank you, big data team. Any comments? It's 9:30 on the dot. Yes. Anybody? Okay, I think we're good to go tonight. Thanks a lot for your participation and your attendance, and we'll be in touch, and see you next Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks. Good night.
Key points around the exam. I don't know. I'll send an email. How's that sound? Yes, Mike, you send me the PowerPoint and the topic summary, and I will post them to the class page.
So the paper or the report, the topic summary is posted under our team Dropbox right now.
Well, if you just email it to me
Oh, email it to you. Okay.
along with the PowerPoint, that way I'll have both of them and I won't have to look around, and I'll get them out there on our week
Okay.
13 page. All right. Nicely done, team. Good information.